Good afternoon, distinguished guests, comrades, and friends. I'm deeply honored and humbled to stand here on the soil that gave Nelson Mandela and one of the greatest examples of liberation and of modern history. I want to thank the Nelson Mandela Foundation for keeping alive not only the memory of a man, but the movement that embodied the struggle for justice and human dignity, whose legacy we celebrate today. I am deeply honored by your invitation to South Africa to deliver this lecture, reflecting on how Mandela's belief in the indivisibility of freedom and his courage to confront power can guide us through the cruelest injustice of our time. After meeting so many of you in the struggle for justice for Palestine over the years, some of whom are in this room this afternoon, and after spending a few yet profoundly intense and inspiring days among you, I feel it deeply. Mandela could not have been born anywhere else. He was fully, truly, beautifully South African. And there is so much of him in so many of you that it cannot be just a coincidence. To invoke Mandela's name is not to canonize him, but to awaken his unfinished struggle within each of us. His legacy invites us to embrace memory not as nostalgia, but as awareness and resistance. His life, not a statue of memory, but a living compass pointing us toward justice, and his lessons endure. The struggle for freedom is never the burden of one person alone, let alone a people alone. When Nelson Mandela walked out of prison, he did more than free himself. He and his comrades rewrote the grammar of power, turning domination into dignity, marking a decisive and historic step in the decolonization of this continent. His life, as well as his words, teach that justice knows no borders, and our freedom is bound to the freedoms of those still denied theirs. That conviction remains our moral compass today, carried by South Africa, by others in the global South. We should call it global majority. And by the young voices rising from America to Europe and other parts of the global North, let's call it the global minority, demanding a freer world. So let's start. In this moment, as the world witnesses the ongoing attempt to erase an entire people in Palestine, from the fleeting ceasefire in shattered Gaza to the accelerated colonization of the West Bank, history is pressing upon us. And standing on this sacred soil, at the roots of Mother Africa, a continent so rich, so nurturing, despite centuries of violence inflicted upon it, it feels deeply symbolic. South Africa and Palestine share deep historic ties forged in the fires of resistance to colonial rule and the quest for liberation. The indomitable spirit of the South African people who overcame centuries of European colonialism, dismantling the criminal system of apartheid, continues to resonate far beyond these shores, inspiring all to believe in the possibility of justice. This reminds us that the Palestinian people too, with the solidarity of those who stand beside them, can one day break the chains of oppression. And in this time of utter diplomatic hypocrisy, political cowardice and self-interest, the words of Nelson Mandela resonate louder than ever. In 1997, he said, "Having achieved our own freedom, we can fall into the trap of washing our hands of difficulties that others face. We would be less than human if we did so." And this moment calls on all of us not to wash our hands of the hell into which Israel has plunged Palestine. 2 years after the beginning of the genocide, and despite the ceasefire, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory remains nothing short of apocalyptic. And I use this term deliberately. Gaza is a wasteland of rubble, refuse, and human remains where survivors cling to life and disease, deprivation, and the relentless weight of violence unseen anywhere this century. Over 240,000 killed or injured, surely many more, say the expert, and the numbers rise daily. Entire neighborhoods obliterated, families returning to ruins only to uncover bodies of their loved ones beneath the rubble, city blocks lying in dust. Clean water is scarce, food nearly non-existent, medicine and electricity critically short. Prisoners tortured and raped, bodies mangled, desecrated, and left in the street. Homes and memories destroyed, intimate lives violated, populations forcibly displaced times and times again across a territory rendered uninhabitable, with nowhere to flee and nothing to return to. Excruciating suffering is widespread, systematic, and by design. And even during the fragile ceasefire, it continues. Over 100 Palestinians have been killed since Israel committed to ceasefire on October 10. For 2 years, Israel has waged a war on a civilian population while Palestinians have no army, no tanks, and no security forces that can protect them. And while in Gaza, it had the excuse of wanting to eradicate Hamas. This does not explain the escalation of violence and acceleration of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. There, over the past 2 years, Palestinians have experienced the largest wave of ethnic cleansing since 1967. More than 40,000 have been driven from their homes, made homeless in the little that remain of their homeland. Over 1,000 killed, 200 children, 10,000 injured, 10,000 detained, many as young as 14, simply to have joined peaceful demonstrations or having been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Armed settlers protected by soldiers roaming with impunity, burning homes, destroying olive trees, attacking families who have farmed for generations. During the olive harvest, once a season of sustenance and joy, farmers now face assault and arson. Their trees uprooted, their soil once. What was once life has become resistance. The century-long slow colonization of Palestine has accelerated into a vicious campaign of destruction where the erasure of the indigenous people is the end goal. Euphemism like conflict or clashes conceal the stark reality of horror that continues unchecked. Instead, this is a textbook case of genocide. Genocide, the intentional destruction of a group as such, is rarely a single act. It unfolds piece by piece, decade by decade, crime after crime. And the ongoing genocide in Palestine, visible in the totality of Israeli crimes, against the totality of Palestinians across the totality of the lands slated for annexation, has been meticulously prepared over decades and enabled by long-standing violations, impunity, and international complicity. Genocide, it seems, is the dormant gene of an apartheid regime rooted in settler colonialism. But apocalypse, deriving from the Greek apokalypsis, originally means to reveal, to uncover. And the current moment is fundamentally one of profound revelation, of truth, of reality beyond ordinary perception. The sacrifice of Gaza happening under our watch forces us to confront the system we live in, the horrid, brutal reality we are all part of, the truth of who we are as individuals, as communities, as states, as institutions, and compels us to choose between courage through principles or cowardice through acceptance. And these are some of the lessons of this revelation. First, the genocide in Palestine has pierced the veil of Maya, showing the underlying geopolitical calculation of the world's most powerful nations. As I came to realize, studying the maps of Greater Israel, stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates, a vision that many Israeli leaders shamelessly brandish in international fora, the occupation of Palestine must be understood as part of a broader project of domination. This is not merely about physical borders of historical Palestine. It is a systematic assertion of permanent supremacy that knows no border. One people controlling land, resources, and the very existence of another or others, often without needing full physical presence or formal annexation. Palestinians are brutalized, dispossessed, and yet they resist. The defiance is why they remain the thorn in the side, not only of an occupying power, but of a wider system where Israel acts together with and often as a proxy of the United States, destabilizing the region to weaken societies and making them easier to dominate. This project is already happening. And the wars and conflicts that have been brought by the United States, its Western allies, and some Arab allies against the peoples in the region speak to that. Palestine's struggle is the stubborn heartbeat of a region fighting for its soul, and the resistance that refuses to be tamed. Second, the Gaza genocide has turned Palestine as the epicenter of global reckoning, exposing how racial, colonial, capitalistic structures make war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide a profitable business. This resonates with the experience of colonized populations worldwide for centuries. For generations, Palestinians have been turned into a testing ground for weapons and surveillance techniques, providing boundless supply and demand, little oversight, and zero accountability. Too many influential corporate entities have profited freely. And this explains how, while Palestinians have been killed and maimed in the thousands every fortnight for the past 2 years, Tel Aviv Stock Exchange kept soaring, growing of 213% and amassing $226 billion in market gains only in the first 18 months of the genocide. And companies have turned over near record profits by equipping Israel with cutting-edge weaponry that has obliterated virtually the defenseless population in Gaza. Tech companies continue to provide dual-use infrastructure that enables mass targeting and mass killing. The machinery of global construction giants is razing Gaza to the ground. Major international banks have underwritten and purchased Israeli treasury bonds, financing the devastation, even as deficit grew and credit ratings fell. This is no ordinary occupation sustained by exploitation. This is a long-standing economy of occupation which has turned genocidal. And third, the meaning of what this genocide means for all of us, for our collective understanding of politics, of solidarity, of humanity. Today we know Gaza, we see Gaza. Hospitals bombed, parents gathering the limbs of their children, journalists and medics torn apart. This horror is visible to us in real time, on our phones, all day long, if we dare to look. But this is also bringing social and political awakening everywhere. It is shaping the conscience, especially of the new generations. Not long ago, my sister in arms from South Africa, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Ciao Tlaleng. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to health told me, the wounds inflicted on the innocent ripple through every nation's soul. She was reflecting on the children from Gaza with me, but from her own experience of a child of apartheid South Africa. And this is true for every young soul beyond Gaza. For the youngest in this hyper-connected world, this genocide is not history, but memory in the making. Those in Europe will not have the distance that my generation had reading about the Holocaust and excuse of ignorance, as some did during the Rwanda genocide or the genocide in Bosnia. Or, as we, in the West, have done, cocooning ourselves into collective amnesia vis-à-vis our history of 500 years of colonial crimes. The Palestinian struggle has not only exposed the suffering of the Palestinians since the creation of the State of Israel and the complicity of our political systems. Today, the world knows the meaning of Nakba, as it has never done, and it will not forget it. And this is increasingly recognized as interconnected with injustices across the majority, the global majority, where economic structures of dispossession remain intact after colonial powers were expelled, and in the global minority as well, where those protesting genocide face fierce repression because the profiteers of the genocide, who are the same who keep seeding misery here in South Africa, as in Congo, as in Sudan, and increasingly across Europe and the United States as well, are those who want to keep operating without disruption. And perhaps this explains why, across Europe and beyond, people today marched with banners that read, "We wanted to save Palestine, but Palestine is saving us." Because we cannot bring the clock back. Palestine has awakened us. And now, with all this knowledge and awareness, the question is simple but urgent. How we do? And we seem suspended between the abyss and hope when the old world dying and the new struggling to breathe. I do not know how we will end this, but of something I'm sure: we will not come out of this genocide as we entered it. This is precisely where international law must act. Supporting Palestinian self-determination is not an act of charity. It is a binding obligation on all states. The International Court of Justice has affirmed that Israel's occupation is illegal, a violation amounting to racial segregation and apartheid that must end. Troops must be withdrawn, colonies dismantled, resources given back, and concrete reparations offered, and the right to return of the refugees must be realized. When South Africa brought the genocide in Gaza before the International Court of Justice, while much of the West looked away, or worse, defended and armed the assailant, you, South Africa, did more than just filing a case. You opened the door for other countries to act. Above all, this is the first settler colonial genocide ever brought before an international court, a moment of historic resonance, echoing not only through Palestine, but through every land where indigenous people have barely survived their own genocides. This act has rekindled faith in international law, so thank you, South Africa, as a symbolic restoration, a quiet revolution in the history of international law. And in doing so, you proved again who you are, heirs of Nelson Mandela, in this conviction that justice must be lived, not merely spoken. And in a few days, I will have the privilege to present my last report to the United Nations Assembly called Gaza Genocide, a Collective Crime. And I will do that from Cape Town. How symbolic. Well, the US has banned me, and with it, my analysis and recommendations. I'm in this country, the country that once again stands at the cusp of what can be the beginning of a new multilateralism, challenging once more colonial and imperial power structures. But you know, as history teaches us, law on paper is never enough. Law is only as strong as the will of states to enforce it, and enforcing it today requires principled choices and courage. And what if states fail to act? What if South Africa and others do not do what they are obliged to do? Impose an arms embargo and suspend trade, investigate and, where warranted, prosecute its nationals who have fought in the Israeli army, prevent businesses from operating in Israel, and stop pro-genocide forces in this country from dehumanizing Palestinians and harassing anyone who stands in solidarity with them. Facing Gaza's devastation, we are called to choose justice over silence, action over apathy. And each of us must also act, the hard part. Make ethical choices as consumers, teachers, students, civil servants, now more than ever called to be more civil than servants. Stop buying products that sustain the illegal occupation and genocide. Hold governments, banks, pension funds, and universities accountable. Boycott Israeli products and those linked to Israeli crimes, as the BDS movement asks us. We have to mobilize unions, coordinate with global solidarity movements, demand divestments from universities and institutions that are engaged with the Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide. And as Dr. Naledi Pandor once said, you said it, if the workers worldwide struck for a month, the genocidal assault on Gaza would stop immediately. It is not too late. It is not too late, and also go and visit Palestine. While Gaza is still under full blockade, so much can only be learned and understood of occupation by witnessing the daily struggles Palestinians face in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and in what remains of historical Palestine, as well as the beauty that permeates that land. And finally, we must demand the liberation of all Palestinian hostages, especially Marwan Barghouti. Marwan Barghouti, whose voice has been silenced for far too long. And in a world where powerful states and corporations seem to perpetuate and advance greed-driven interests at our expense, we who do not hold unlimited wealth, we who do not hold weapons or control algorithms, we can still find new ways forward. I think that South Africa's legacy shows us that no system of oppression can endure forever. And against all odds, the people united can truly challenge and change the course of history. And taking a step back through the century, humanity has always had to fiercely fight for the affirmation of human rights. From the slave trade to racial segregation, women's rights, indigenous people's rights, minority rights, the rights of persons with disabilities, and LGBTQI+, and so forth. Together, with the enduring battle against apartheid, colonialism, and illegal occupation, we must stand together. None of this struggle is a finished business. We do not have the luxury to give up. True change and transformation demand courage and yes, sacrifice. But it's through this sacrifice and it's through steadfastness that humanity is reminded of its shared responsibility and its capacity for renewal. These days, while visiting the archives of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, I held in my hands a poignant script in which Nelson Mandela wrote that across centuries, men and women have come and gone. Some have left absolutely not trace. Others are going to be remembered for the evil they caused, and others for what they tried to do in the name of justice. Today, these words echo from South Africa to Italy, from Palestine to Sudan, from Australia to the United States, the states built on lands taken through centuries of genocide. And each of us, we should ask ourselves, what do we want to leave on our passage on this earth that we do not receive from our parents, but we borrow from our children? Personally, I never imagined that my path would lead me to confront power in this way. I was born in a small mountain town in southern Italy, and a place that seems ordinary, yet whose lessons were extraordinary. My early years were shaped not by fame and privilege, but by an education that I believe sought to teach me history with honesty. I learned of the Holocaust as a benchmark of human depravity and of Italy's survival through 20 brutal years of dictatorship under Mussolini's fascism and his fascist brigades. A struggle whose sacrifices freed us from tyranny and gave us a constitution grounded in justice, equality, and human dignity. However, what my European education did not teach me was how the horrors of the Holocaust built upon what Germany had done to the Herero and the Nama peoples in Namibia. They did not teach me how the dehumanization of the Jews is the same, how the dehumanization the Jews were subjected to is the same the colonized societies had to endure for decades, if not centuries. And indeed, as the Israeli historian Raz Segal says, the idea of a superior race was neither born nor died with the Nazi regime, and in fact, continues to fester in the world today. And only later in life did I come to understand that centuries of racism, supremacism, and patriarchy that had erased entire communities across Europe before and while expanding into the settler colonial enterprise that would scar millions across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. By exceptionalizing the Holocaust as the only aberration in our history, we, the Europeans, have concealed the many other crimes and injustices that our ancestors committed, and in doing so, undermined our own capacity to see the structural and eruptive forms of violence that permeate our society and the international community up until today, a process which finds in the ongoing endorsement in Gaza by too many Western states its monstrous culmination. And in this moment in history, my commitment to justice also includes undoing such legacy by carrying forward the voices of my nation's humanist legal tradition into this global chorus for justice. Thinking of Mandela, I can't avoid mentioning my fellow national Antonio Gramsci, a politician and philosopher who was arrested by the fascist regime in 1926, leading to his death a decade later. He said, "Indifference is the dead weight of history," which I find echoed in Archbishop Desmond Tutu's words. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Such historical figures left in the world the sparkles of light and justice, embodied a commitment to justice and humanity that shall inspire us as we move forward. Freedom, justice, and human dignity can never be taken for granted. They must be defended every day, otherwise they risk to quietly disappear. And as I reflect on my ordinary story besides your extraordinary one, I try to fully grasp the depth of Ubuntu. I am because you are. This reaches me as a truth forged in pain and resilience. The steadfastness of the Palestinian people, Sumud, is the sister of your own Ubuntu. In Arabic, Sumud means steadfastness, resilience that becomes a way of being. It is the grandmother in Gaza who gathers her orphaned grandchildren amid rubble and whispers. Remember. It is the farmer in the West Bank who replants his olive sapling each time settlers uproot the old tree, refusing to give up his bond to the soil. It is the children in Gaza studying in tents after their schools have been destroyed. Sumud is resilient with grace, defiance with dignity, the quiet, unyielding courage to keep living, hoping, and loving amid the hardest adversity. Sumud, like Ubuntu, is not merely a word. It is the moral DNA of survival, a profound expression of faith in our shared interdependence, a powerful antidote to the isolation and fear that conflictuality sows at every level and in every domain. Together, they define an ethics of coexistence and perhaps what Nelson Mandela envisioned, a world in which empathy becomes the language of politics, and politics is rooted in justice as the recognition of our shared humanity. They remind us that no one is truly free until we are all free, and that our dignity is inseparable from the dignity of others. And both teach us that we are bound together in each other's suffering and hope. And as I move to the conclusion, if there is one thing that I would like you to take from this lecture is this: whether recognized or not by those in power, the Palestinian struggle for freedom stands at the heart of the movement toward a truly decolonized world order. In other words, a world in which international law is applied universally and the crimes of colonialism for which Mandela and his comrades spent 27 years in prison, as hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have in theirs, are finally accounted for. Otherwise, it will be remembered as the greatest moral failure of our time. And that is why, no matter the repression we face, Palestine will increasingly stand at the center of all struggle for justice worldwide. Therefore, as we reflect on peace and cooperation, let's appreciate these. Opposing the bombing or so-called ceasefire is not peace. In this atrocity that some has the audacity to call peace, the Israeli army maintains controls over more than half of Gaza, continuing to kill everywhere. And everywhere it can, and rapaciously steal land and resources across the World Bank, continuing to hold and torment thousands of Palestinian hostages. The self-determination of the Palestinian people appears still as far as it has ever been. And this is why the pressure must continue if the Palestinians are to achieve the same justice that everyone deserves. Millions of ordinary people are crying out for moral clarity and principled leadership, for end of complicity in my beautiful country and in yours, South Africa. They long for a vision that places human life above conquest, dignity above convenience, community above self-interest. They demand an international order rooted in our shared humanity. And this is the new multilateralism that we must build, not one for the few, but one for the many, where solidarity, as the political declination of love, can be fully realized in each and every society. And in this, your leadership lights a path for others to follow. South Africa can and must continue to stand at the forefront, must continue to open doors and compelling others to follow. Many today feel hesitant of standing up to power. And I understand. Fear is human. But as someone who comes from a place that has been plagued by the mafia, where the logic of intimidation could smear, torment, and even kill those who stand for justice, I tell you from my heart, it's not the blow that defeats us. It's refusing to pick ourselves back up. The only true defeat is when we left fear and intimidation silence us. And fear cannot withstand the power of people united in a just cause. It can be defeated by the unity of ordinary people and the unity of struggles across the world. And today, in many ways, I stand before you in a place of vulnerability, but also of great strength, empowered by the resilience of the Palestinian people and everyone standing with them. And by doing the right thing, we find allies, and through solidarity, we find strength. But yes, we have a long way to go, and we have begun. And in this beginning, I find hope. I believe we can lay the foundation not only for a more just global order, but for a new way of being as a global community, the realization of the principles of Ubuntu and Sumud, a world that finally embraces humanity, solidarity, justice, and equality for all. Alone, we are frail, we are fragile, like butterfly wings. But when we flap those little wings all together, we can make a storm. And may justice be our storm. And before I leave you, let me use your soil to send a message to the Palestinian people. Whatever happens, Palestine will have written this tumultuous chapter of history, not as a footnote in the chronicles of the would-be conquerors, but as the newest verse in a centuries-long saga of people who have raised against injustice, against colonialism, and today, more than ever, against liberal tyrannies. Thank you, and così sia bonga, and grazie. Shukran.